Hi, I'm Danger Dan Jers, the host and GM of the D&D Real Play podcast, D&D Dark. Join us on Wednesdays for an absurd, over-the-top comedy horror adventure, starring some of history's most infamous monsters.
I'm Ben Magnet. I play Mary Frankenstein, our barbarian.
I am Daniel Cruz. I am playing Imhotep the Mummy, our cleric.
I'm Jordan, and I play Larry Talbot, a lycanthropic warlock.
I am Grayson, playing Jet Griffin, the Invisible Man, the party's rogue.
I am Aaron. I play the Phantom of the Opera, our bard.
For more information, go to dndarkpodcast.com and listen to us anywhere you find podcasts.
Let's go. Master of all things tabletop. With the Paladins of Podcast. They ruin the games you love by talking rules that suck, how to build kick-ass encounters, destroy worlds, and really get your players invested. So go ahead and throw that fistful of dice at someone. Because we're going on a side quest.
Awesome. Paladins of Podcast are back. What's up, Eli?
Hey, Rob. How you doing today?
Not too bad. I switched out my comfy chair because my normal days provide me nearly 24 hours of constant awakeness. It's exciting.
Understand the need for a comfy chair.
Heck yeah. You said you were working a little bit more too, right?
Yeah, luckily I have a very comfy chair. I actually have, psychologically, I don't know if it's great for me, but I do have the same type of chair, both at work and at home. And they're both super comfy.
Do you think about it often? Like, man, I'm sitting in the same chair I sit at work.
A little bit, but I mean, I also do have the luxury of being able to work at home every once in a while. So
okay. There's plus and minuses
the whole time. Yeah, and it's
right.
Also the chair I GM from. So
right. So
hopefully that bleeds into my work.
Hopefully. Now, I do have a question. I know that you do a lot of software programming.
Yeah.
Do you consider the work at your stage in your career monotonous or boring?
I think it can be at sometimes. Yeah. I mean, but I think at the same amount that I've had at any other sort of profession I've worked or job I've worked at. There can be things that you're repeating, but I think actually, unfortunately for the company and the profit margins, every different customer that we work with is a different configuration. Even though we're working from the same basis, there's enough different things that makes it interesting or unique. You have to deal with milk differently than you do ammunition or a muffler.
Sure. And it's funny because I'm sure some of our listeners are, Rob, where are you going with this? I work a job where at this point, I'm still learning quite a bit, but there are many aspects where I'm just doing something like making sure bolts are tight so things don't fall out and break, which is monotonous, mind-numbing at times. And it provides me the opportunity to think of creative shit to throw in my games or story elements to add. And it always harkens back to an episode of The Big Bang Theory that I've seen where I think it's Sheldon decides to get a monotonous, boring job as a server so he can have creative ideas because those kinds of jobs allow you to think and your creativity blossoms. Hopefully your job is able to provide that as well without being monotonous and boring, because I did not win the lottery on that one.
Yeah, I've tried to listen to like podcasts or anything that I have to pay attention to at the same time as I work sometimes. It does not work for me. So I guess if that's about the monotonous question, I do feel like I'm engaged mentally the whole time. So like I listen to a lot of power metal, I listen to fantasy metal.
Nice.
That'll inspire me actually.
Same. Any particular favorites?
I mean, usually I'm pretty lazy and I'll just search into, like, if I'm just looking for power fantasy, I'll just look up, like, fantasy metal on Spotify or Pandora, and then I'll just look at whichever one has the most interesting, like, art on it to start with. Or I'm a sucker for a good Spotify playlist description.
Okay.
Because usually people underutilize it, but sometimes there'll be, like, really funny ones, like, what are you doing? just listen to it. And
Nice.
I'm like, you've earned me a listen. So.
Nice. That's how I found Glory Hammer and Angus McFife, which I think we've talked briefly about it. You're familiar with Glory Hammer, at least a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It's their entire album is like a D&D campaign all the way through, and I can't complain about it. It's fun.
There's a literal traveler. I think it was Craig that shared it with us. There's a literal traveler album, and it's got like everything is about playing traveler, and that was so amazing to listen to.
Yeah, I think it was definitely Craig who shared that with us. So Craig, if you still listen, thank you. It's fun.
I love it. Right before a traveler session, I always listen to it on the drive over. Yeah, it just gets me in the like the mindset of traveler and the theme, and
I dig it.
Yeah,
I dig it. Have you been having any issues lately with some of your games as a DM? Not necessarily players, but cultivating ideas.
I think I was having a little bit of an issue, and then I started listening to more fantasy metal. And I go on walks. Like I'll go on walks, I'll put in some fantasy metal, and I'll just like start grooving until I have some ideas.
All right.
It's probably not healthy, but I probably talk to myself the whole time. So luckily, it's very remote woods.
That's cool. I think talking to yourself works.
I have to read out your ideas, especially. Sometimes by just reading it out and hearing it vocally completely changes sentence structure, descriptions, or even the intent.
I agree with that too. And I ask because lately I have been feeling as though I've hit a creative block. I'll go to get NPCs down or something like town descriptions, or not necessarily story elements or story ideas, because I have those in place already. But since the nuking of the Friday game with the emotionally and mentally taxing player that stepped away from the table, thank goodness, since then I've really felt like I'm in a slump. I don't know. I feel like what I write is utter shit, and I don't want to work with it. I keep starting over. I keep the ideas the same, but I just can't seem to get what I want down.
What are you primarily, you said you've been buying some books, some RPG books. What are you primarily buying and reading for yourself? Like, is it setting guides? Is it rule sets, adventure modules?
So I've been purchasing, I guess we can consider 3 types of books. Lore from real world, like Russian lore, Midwest Native American lore, modern Midwestern lore. So that way I have ideas to base my own lore in Animar around, because I based the regional locations off of physical locations in the real world. I've also been purchasing new rule sets because I primarily play in Pathfinder First Edition. I've been buying up as much secondary third-party publisher content as possible that I find interesting, because I own all the hardcover books. Not campaign settings, but like I've got the Mythic Monster Manual from Legendary Games in my lap right now. Waiting on the Mythic Spell Compendium and the Mythic Player's Handbook, all to go with that, because I've got plans on adding Mythic elements to the game. I also have, what do I have? Path of the Reluctant Hero. I mentioned last time I had introduced some Cthulhu-esque themes. So I picked up the Cthulhu mythos and the mythos monster manuals and spell compendiums. Those kind of things to help me work existing ideas I've already had.
How often do you like read just fantasy or sci-fi, or maybe listen to an audiobook?
I generally will listen to an audiobook because I got a 45-minute drive to and from my day job. Listen to an audiobook there and back. So it's 90 minutes a day. And I really enjoy it. It's hard for me to listen to an audiobook outside of work or during work other than my drive, because my life just does not structure for that. Finding a good one where I like the production value can be difficult, but I'm also picky. It's weird.
Is it mainly like different podcasts, or is it an audiobook?
It's got to be a strict audiobook, believe it or not, as much as yeah.
Well, then I have a great recommendation for you.
Please.
I recommend the Lighthouse Magazine does a story podcast. They've got a story podcast, and then they've got one that's like, and it alternates between science fiction stories and fantasy stories. And then I think they've got another one that's just only fantasy stories. And they're all short stories. So they go from like 15 minutes to like an hour and a half. I think one of them was like 2 hours.
Okay.
But they are all fantastic and top notch. Where I remember there was a stretch where I was listening to a couple episodes, and I'd listen to the episode and I'd go, "Oh my god, that's so inspiring!" And then I'd go and I'd write, and I'd be like, I listened to the next episode, and then that one would also just be like, ah. So I had to sometimes stop listening to them because I'd be like, I'd start listening to the next one, and I'd be like, wait, no, there's too much going on. I need to think up this last idea.
I like that. Yeah, and you said that was Lighthouse Magazine podcast.
Yeah, or Light Speed.
Okay, that was probably me who got it wrong. You probably said it right the first time. Light Speed Magazine.
There's fantasy. One of them is just called Fantasy Magazine, Fantasy Stories, and then the other one is Lightspeed Magazine, Science Fiction and Fantasy Story Podcast.
All right, I'm going to do what I can to remember that. I want to get it in the description. Maybe I'll even reach out to them and say, hey, we listened to your show. We liked the inspiration that your short stories provide us. Thank you for doing what you guys do.
Sure. Yeah, I'm totally down. They're absolutely great. But I was going to recommend that. That's what I listen to because I also have a little bit of a commute, or sometimes when I'm going on a walk.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also started reading more, and I think that might help. Just because that, like, it seems like you're doing a lot of reading a lot of literature about doing like top-down descriptions and like building your world from the top. And maybe you just need to start building the world up from maybe more of a player's perspective.
That's kind of what the third class of books that I've been buying is. And it's character arcs, which are primarily designed for single story fiction literature.
Wait, what are you buying?
Books on the best character arcs and tropes and how to craft plot twists for characters that the audience doesn't see coming. And I'm applying the techniques to the player characters in my game.
Well, I do think that does get to that player's perspective. I think that's still looking at it from the perspective of like a writer looking at your game. And I think sometimes you get really great inspiration by like reading and being in a world and seeing something described and being just like, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's true. And one of my favorite series I have read multiple times is The Lost Years of Merlin by T.A. Barron. Funnily, I love the entire series. It's fantasy. My primary focal point when I read is generally fantasy. I like Arthurian fantasy, medieval fantasy, Tolkien style Middle Earth fantasy. And Merlin, by far. In fact, funny thing, are you also a Harry Potter fan?
I thought it was fine. I'm not crazy about it. I read them.
Sure. But so you're at least familiar with it.
Yeah.
And when it comes to wizards, I would have to say that Merlin is at the absolute top of power, skill, level of intricacy, etc. And when somebody tries to mention a Harry Potter reference or character that would theoretically best Merlin, my favorite only argument that I have, by the way, is the fact that they say Merlin's beard as a form of general surprise, swear word, however it's needed at the time. Therefore, meaning he's alive, well, or had been, and powerful by some degree and well known. So my
It's awesome.
my argument is weak at best, but at least they reference it.
No,
Yeah,
that checks out. I mean, I'm sure.
thank you.
Isn't J.K. Rowling British? Or,
Yeah, I think
I
so.
mean, they're probably exposed to a lot of Arthurian legends, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's
Probably.
tied in there.
Probably. But another one I really enjoy is called The Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan. The entire series is, I want to say it's 10 books for the base series, two auxiliary books,
I've read
and
these ones as well.
and one addition, maybe two additional series after that now. I love
Looks
them.
like there's 12 books.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
And they get better with each one. So that's kind of the thing. What else? Aragon was a good one, like the Last Inheritance cycle.
I don't think I've ever finished that series. I think I read one, like the first two, maybe three, and then
Out of the
I think
4
I
or
stopped
5
reading
now.
them by the time they came out. Yeah, I should pick those up again.
Yeah, and start with book 1 again. And
Okay.
the thing about the Aragon series is, if I remember correctly, it was the author's first book series, and he kind of wrote it as one huge book all the way through. And his writing gets better with every single book. So you can see the progression all the way through. Same thing with the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, which I absolutely love. He hits his stride by book 4, and there's like 15 books in that series.
Yeah, that's one that I actually have not read. I've heard a lot of really good things about it, and I've heard a lot of people talk about it, but I've never picked them up.
I listen to the audiobooks, and dude, I swear, absolutely, I could actually talk about some of my favorite books for an entire episode. Have you read the Prince of Thorns series?
Prince of Thorns.
Yep.
Don't think so. It doesn't ring a bell.
Incredible grim dark series, and the twist is freaking phenomenal when you finally get to the end of it, the entire series. It's actually a twist I've used in one of my games. So
That's the best. You should steal from good
Yes.
authors. Yeah.
absolutely, we've already said steal from everywhere you can.
As long as you're not publishing it,
Agreed.
do it.
Absolutely agree on that. But I think you're right, honestly. Maybe it'll take a little bit of music and reading to kind of get the idea going again.
Maybe
So.
even just listen to some fantasy metal while you're writing your while you're doing your writing. Do you typically listen to anything when you like write or prepare?
Yeah, I like to listen to instrumental music that matches the mood that I'm looking for, because I think cinematically. So the music helps define the cinematic visual for me. And I kind of write it not like a screenplay, but I write what I see as though I'm describing a dream, and then refine from there. It sounds like a weird process when I say that out loud.
Do you play music at all when you're at your tables?
I started to. We listened to a variety of D&D themed, well, they say D&D themed, but generally it's Renaissance Fair themed, tavern style music, generally low fare background music with no words, so that way we don't get involved in the message of the verbals. But yes, I have. We started playing music during our sessions.
Who do you might have like I've tried to do it a couple times. I tried to do it in person once and ran into the trouble of I just didn't want to be distracted by setting or like changing the music. And that didn't work very well. And so actually the second time I tried it, I actually had one of the players control the music. And it worked a lot better.
That's fair. I just randomize a playlist that's just general theme music. And once it's on, I treat it like a store. You hear it in the background every now and then when things kind of hit a small lull, but overall, we don't interact with it. So
it spawned one of the really funny, a quite funny moment in one of my campaigns, though.
Hit us with it.
We were playing a bunch of music, and there was one day where the other person that would be, we did some Discord shenanigans so that we could have the Discord playing music in it, and one player, and that it wasn't working out, and so another player got their recorder that they still had from like
Oh.
elementary school.
4th grade.
Yeah, and started playing the recorder, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So we had like an entire campaign session with this person playing a recorder the whole time, and
That's funny.
God,
That's funny. I remember learning the recorder when I was in elementary school. And as I had children who had made it through 4th grade, I remember them learning the recorder. We still have some of their recorders.
can you play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star?
Even if I could play the recorder masterfully, it would still sound the exact same as if I played it now today. So
that's
no,
exactly how my player sounded. It was not good.
the recorder's not good. Like, that is a bad instrument. It's got the makings of a good one, but it's horrible.
It's a little shrill.
Yes, absolutely so. Oh man. So, all right, I got a weird question for you. We kind of danced around a little bit. Have you been keeping up with some of the OGL things going on?
A little bit, but I try not to get too in the weeds of it because I looked at it. I'm just waiting for whatever Wizards is going to put out next. There's going to be tons of rumor and more speculation, and so I don't need to be a part of it. I don't do enough things with 5th edition, so I've kind of tried to take a step back.
That's generally where I'm trying to stand. But again, Epic Table Games, we're trying to look at publishing content, and we actually had a lot planned under the OGL. I'm like, shit, I don't want to go this route now. So, personally, a little bit more skin in the game. But I think it was earlier today. Wizards of the Coast through D&D Beyond released a statement about an apology and how they're going to do things. Have you had a chance to see that, or have you seen it at all?
I have read that statement. Yes.
Okay. What are your thoughts on it? I know that as a consumer who doesn't have much necessity for the OGL itself, but because the OGL affects third-party publishers and anybody who really utilizes a D20 system and same skill sets, it affects them to a degree. And then tertiarily, you. So as you see this trying to be removed as much as possible, how are you feeling?
Well, if this was coming from a gaming company on of a smaller scale, which is really all of them, but if it came from like an indie production company, I'd be like, this is perfect. This is exactly what we wanted. Full steam ahead. That's great. However, Wizards is not an indie company. They're also a corporation, and I'm sure all the employees here I'm sure they're wonderful, but until I see it actually in the OGL statement that they put out, it means nothing.
Right. And that is the opinion that I would think a lot of individuals would have who are not directly related to being affected by the OGL. Working for companies or producing games or working with content that's under the OGL. So it's refreshing to hear that your position is generally being removed. On my end, the apology and how we're going to do it really feels like a damage control motion where they're trying to backpedal a little bit. And my concern that I had, again, because I've got a little bit more invested interest in either working with an OGL or not, my concern is that they're going to push a lot of these ideas that they had in their quote unquote draft version into other licensures that are going to be necessary to create content for Wizards of the Coast D&D products, which I think is just another way of them going to help squeeze out third-party publishers. My thought process here also leads to Paizo has come to save the day again with the idea of developing their ORC license, and they want input from multiple different publishers. The same thing WotC should have done originally.
Yeah. I just think Wizards of the Coast, they're being a little bit like, or Hasbro, they are the big dog in the pen, so they can try to bully the industry. And if money starts going other places, then good.
Agreed. I'm surprised so many individual players who have canceled their D&D Beyond subscriptions because of this. Like, I didn't realize it affected them so much, but at the same time, they're passionate about this hobby. So when you attack multiple other industry professionals, we all kind of feel attacked a little bit. So I'm really hoping right there with you that this puts a entire shift in the space. I want to see other companies really build up new products. I want to see a vast majority of new rule sets, fun things to do, not dominated by essentially one mechanic system.
Yeah, I think it's good too to see a lot of the other companies start to pivot away and distance themselves. I think that shows some really good character in some of these other companies. Because I mean, obviously, 5th edition and D&D is a huge cash cow. So especially when they're just proposing these terms to step away before they even finalize their new license, I think that takes a lot of guts. If you're running a company, and so I think that says a lot about some of these other companies' characters and their leadership.
I would definitely agree. And I mean, we all know that obviously they don't want to have, WotC doesn't want to have the same fiasco they had with 4th Ed. You know, they don't want to just push out a new license and be like, yeah, nobody's going to join that one. So I'm super excited, and I follow a lot of companies actually, Modifius Games, Chaosium. All of them produce really interesting shit that I'm like, damn, getting into this is phenomenal. I want to see those guys make more. I want to see more content. I want to see more original content. I want to see more of their content blended in with other systems. And that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that this works out to the benefit where we as players get more.
Yeah, and I think the more systems you know how to play, the closer you are to becoming a GM. And the more GMs we have, if everyone was a GM, that would be a perfect world.
Yeah, I agreed. And I think it was a few weeks ago, actually, by this point, I think it's a month or so, multiple months or so, we came across an article about how there's a shortage of game masters and how it must be this problem that the concept of running a game is so put on a pedestal because we have Critical Role and what people have dubbed the Matt Mercer syndrome, etc. And they think that you have to know all the rules instead of just diving in and, you know, brutalizing it until you guys stop having fun and then learning how to do it right. It's all part of the process. Learning how to play multiple games, I think, is right there along with it. Which it's a lead into the cliffhanger from last week, man.
What game system did you bring to talk about today? What did you bring for show and tell today, Rob? Or just tell?
Man, Eli, I had such a hard time with this. There were so many that I wanted to talk about, and I actually decided to choose one that I haven't mentioned previously. Yes, I got the book right here with me, and I know the audience is kind of missing out. Yeah, they are. You know, you got video so we can see each other. They're missing out. But the book itself is called Soulbound, Dark Industrial Fantasy. And this looks like a really huge tome of a book.
It looks like more novel size than like the traditional like textbook of an RPG book.
Yes. And to kind of detail a little bit about this, there are two things I noticed immediately right away compared to other books. There is no publisher's page or copyright page.
Okay.
Just, you're so used to seeing those things that when they're not there, they stand out.
Are they somewhere else?
I looked and I didn't see anything in the front or back.
Fascinating.
Yeah, there's there's a little tidbit in the very back corner of one of the very last pages about the printing. But unless the copyright is, no, this is ICG testing. Print CPSIA information can be obtained at igtesting.com.
Oh, well,
Yep.
interesting.
And I mean, there's an ISBN.
Yeah,
but
what caught your eye about this system besides the unique size?
all right, I picked it up at Gen Con 2022.
Woohoo, good con.
Yes, it was actually in a bin of cheap excess games. So, A, size. B, it is
sale.
Yeah. So the size of the book, the fact that it was there was a sale. I hadn't heard of it before, and I'm always on the hunt for new RPGs. The artwork is painterly. It's dark. It is got a vibe to it that just kind of says on the edge of I want to say on the edge of survival. So that was first impressions. The game itself, in fact, if I can get to the quote real quick, it's dark industrial fantasy. So it's at the edge of like a golden age of humanity's creation of technology blended with the idea of magic. And it's got everything from swords to guns, which can be a little jarring to some people, but the way it works out is interesting. I can explain it in a second. But here we go. Soulbound is a tabletop game about wielding unique and powerful weapons to slay mythic beasts. Set in the golden age of invention, a time plagued by giant fauna and corrupted demigods. As wielders of soulbound weapons, it's your duty to slay these horrors and protect the fine people of Solemn.
So what kind of dice system does it use?
It's a D6 system.
It's a D6 system.
Yep, and primarily sixes are. I'm sorry, I think it's 5 or 6 is your successes. So if you roll a 5 or 6, you have your success. As I was reading the rule set, not just today, but as I peek through it, the thing that I absolutely love about Soulbound is that your characters are basic humans. Your power comes from your randomly generated soulbound weapon.
So is character creation pretty simple then, or?
Yes, because all you're really creating is your weapon.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the way to do it, again, it's you start off by rolling a D100, and that tells you what type of weapon you're rolling, and then you roll your, I believe it's D6s from there, and you figure out if it's a bonded weapon or a paired weapon or just an augmented weapon, and then from there you kind of figure out how you got it. And it's neat. It's interesting. It reminds me of the Monster Hunter video game where you don't really necessarily level up, but you level up all over your equipment. So the vibe, it's a fun vibe in a desolate futuristic setting where you're just fighting to survive.
What is the what complexity does the main rules have? Is it fairly simple, or what is it? Is it on, like, compared to D&D as a fairly complex game?
I would say compared to D&D, it is much less complex.
Okay.
But because it's not a D20 system like D&D is, if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, you kind of get caught in that weird translation stage for a while. Like, you're used to rolling a D20 for things, but now you're just rolling D6s. You have your dice pool that you're trying to calculate, figure out, etc. Once you get past that initial, I don't want to say culture shock, we'll say RPG shock. It's easy to pick up, easy to flow, works really well. And I dig it. The entire thing was written by one person as a passion project, and as it grew, she had individuals come on board to help her with getting all the rules figured out, adding more to it. So it's actually a bigger game. I think it initially kickstarted in 2020, looking for $16,500, funded within 24 hours. So
That was a very exact number.
yeah, I just looked into that earlier today because I wanted some information
that
on
makes
it.
sense. So it's a game mainly about creating this weapon that you're soulbound to. Are the rules then mainly covering combat and I guess fighting, or does it have
Yeah,
other avenues as well?
there are a few avenues. It does give you a lot of information about the world. It tells you about the different types of people, um, and some of the conditions and item conditions that you can develop along the way. So it's not specifically not excuse me, it's not 100% weapons. It's also about a little bit more of the equipment and NPCs, some abilities, magical abilities, spell-like abilities, like adjusting climate, channel senses, create scent, those kind of abilities, powers, spells, arcane tricks is what they're called. Um, those help build the character, the NPCs flavor, and it is heavily geared towards surviving and encounters because the idea behind the game is slaying these mythic beasts, these huge creatures of flora and fauna, building-sized monsters, skyscraper-sized trees, things that are walking to actively destroy the earth and humanity.
How lethal do you think the game is?
Um, I'm not sure. It's kind of hard to gauge. Like, I could see at times where it would be incredibly lethal, but at other times maybe not. But it specifically says that death is way way more likely. It's death is common, but in fact, the sentence on death I just flipped through. Death is common in Soulbound. Commoners live in squalor, never rising above their circumstances, and often fall victim to the brevity of an unforgiving life. Those who become too bold or too curious won't see the light of day. I mean, that
All right.
that ominous for sure, but it makes you feel like death is super plausible. But the next sentence kind of says, "Is it for the world or is it for our players?" So I'm not sure.
You think you're gonna run a game of it?
I'd like to eventually, especially as I start picking through individual bits and pieces to develop my system.
I think that's great. You got to get
Yeah,
inspiration from other designers.
absolutely.
That's the best way to do it.
Thank you.
Uh,
All right.
the game I brought is the Genisys system.
Okay.
It's by Edge Gaming. It was originally by Fantasy Flight.
Yep.
And specifically, I was going to talk about their Star Wars system. The
Okay.
Genesis system itself is a generic system that you can, like, with no setting. So you could run it in the Stone Age, or you could run it in a sci-fi game. But the Star Wars game pins it down. You're in Star Wars. It uses its own unique dice system, where essentially you can succeed and fail, and then added to that, you can add advantage, disadvantage, and then triumph and despair. So you
Okay.
could succeed with disadvantage, or fail but have a triumph. So it's a lot more narrative in that aspects.
Mhm.
Like, succeeding and failing is a binary, but the advantages and disadvantages and triumph and despair can range widely.
Right.
And to kind of balance that out and give the players an opportunity, or maybe to like swing dice in their favor or create narrative situations, they have, at least for the Star Wars game, they have a pool of light and dark force points.
Yep. I've heard of
Where,
that.
yeah, if it's on the light side, the player can use it to narratively create something or give them a boost in their dice rolls, and then it flips over to the dark side, where the GM can then have the opportunity to use it. I think the game is just incredibly well designed. It's got a great structure, and it feels so much like Star Wars. That's why I love it so much, because I've playing it both at conventions and at my table and running it as well. Every single time I feel like I'm in a Star Wars movie or show. It captures that cinematic feel. And,
Is
yeah.
Is this this is the D6 one, right?
This is not the D6 one. That's by West Edge Games.
Yes.
I also think that's a great game. I love it for convention plays.
But the reason I ask is because I think it's, when it comes to the flavor here, it's either the D6 or the one that you're talking about now, by Fantasy Flight. I think it's people who say if you're not playing either one of those, you're not actually playing in the world. Nothing provides the same feel, nothing provides the same theme, nothing gives you that flavor like the Genesis systems or the D6 system.
That very well may be right, but I've never put it in such such concrete terms.
Okay, that's fair. That's only what I've heard. So
it's just a game that I especially with all the great Star Wars movies and shows that are coming out these days.
Mm-hmm.
We've got just a slew of Star Wars content, and I mean it's an easy way to get inspired by watching an episode of The Mandalorian and then going over to play this Edge of the Empire game, and it feels like you can easily transition it. And like not only that, but the community is absolutely wonderful, especially for the role-playing game.
Okay.
Not just as like supporting players, but they put on, I think, almost monthly like GM's workshops. Where
Really?
they'll like take players' questions, and even if I'm not playing a Star Wars game, I love to check it out because they talk about encounter design and not just encounter design like as theory, but also like using the mechanics of that game because they have their specific audience. They
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of like they'll take fan work and they'll have like source book contests and fan driven race creation, and where they all go through and they're all building bonuses, and you can just go on and have like a very like a system designing question, and you can kind of ask about, oh well, this is where we're seeing stats like this and they reflect it like this. Oh, what if we did this?
I like that. You don't generally see that kind of thing in a lot of publishing gaming communities. Like a lot of times, once they release the book, they're really just content producing. They don't generally have those round tables for people to come in. I like that.
It was crazy for me too, because Fantasy Flight Games kind of stopped producing the RPG for a while, and now it's Edge Games that's got control of it and is going to produce resources for it. But for a decent amount of time, there was no one really releasing kind of official content or anything for the game, and the community is still alive and thriving. I think it is due to both. I mean, Star Wars is a hugely popular franchise.
Yes.
But I think also the community and the game are just that good.
I would have to agree. You think the House of Mouse will ever decide to put their finger in this community too?
Who knows? I've played. I think it's a very good narrative system.
Yep.
Which I think is fascinating. But as someone who's really into math and optimization and just as kind of concepts, the book and the way it's essentially a point buy system where you gain experience points and you can spend experience points to buy a skill or buy a talent or
Yeah.
increase in ability. And so there's a lot like you have just an immense amount of options to build from. And then it translates into a very, very fun narrative game. So
Dig it. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the character creation process then? Because a lot of people may not be super familiar with the idea of point buy. That kind of faded away after third edition, Pathfinder first edition. If I remember correctly, a lot of games kind of give you a static array or dice roll.
yeah, D&D has never really been I guess maybe, I think there was second edition had some point buy stuff, or at least a point buy option.
I think third did too.
Yeah, it might have, but I didn't know about it. So essentially, you choose a race, and you get a lump sum of experience points, and you can choose to spend them really how you'd like. You can use them to increase abilities, or your ability scores. And then after that, you start buying basically talent charts.
Okay.
So,
like a class, like you say, I want this talent chart.
But these are arranged in careers.
Okay.
So you might be like a big game bounty hunter, and that gives you access. It gives you a little bit like you're starting, like in D&D, how you have some like class abilities. So you get some bonuses in some classes, and you're considered trained, which makes buying those abilities cheaper. But mainly, you get access to basically a talent tree of abilities, and each of these abilities, they're always themed. Like the names of them are always themed towards whatever that class is. See if I can find one over here. Like the mechanic has like a gearhead ability, and as you spend experience points, you can buy down to get to these other talents.
Okay.
And what you can also do is you can also buy access to other talents from other careers, or you can use it to buy force powers, and then you can use these talents to upgrade your force powers. So 2 players with force push might have completely different uses of that ability.
Okay, that's interesting. Does it allow you to go purely career-less? Like, can you just choose to cherry pick from the entire spectrum, or do you have to initially nail down one career?
You have to choose an initial career, but you don't actually have to buy any talents from them if you ever want to. You could just choose to buy abilities, and then from that career, you'd have some skills that would be cheaper than others.
Okay.
And some of these careers are also kind of like backgrounds. Like one of your quote unquote careers could be like you're a clone and you're a bounty hunter, big game hunter, or you're also a Padawan or an exile or something like that.
Sure, that's cool. I like that. And one of the same questions that you had asked, I'd like to reiterate here. Compared to our D&D as our complexity chart, where does this fall?
I think in the rules that it has, it's probably of equal comparison in the rules that they have.
Okay.
However, that is also because they have to try to deal with like with a sci-fi game, you need rules for both starships and like being on the ground. So I think they have to go into a little bit of details, but you could also, but then they also have kind of magic with force powers.
Right.
But I think at the table itself, it runs a lot smoother and a lot quicker. It's
okay.
It feels easy to arbitrate with, and like make gaming like GM decisions. We have a little bit more tools to decide, and I think that's kind of the more narrative system at play. While D&D, I'd call a roll system, ROLL.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. And do you find A general question here, I guess, because you have, let's see, you said, if I remember correctly, early 2000s is when you broke into the hobby, right? Or no,
Yes.
you start. That was when you were young. I forget, you're a little younger than I am.
Yeah.
So you were young, broken around the early 2000s. Your primary experience was third edition, 3.5.
Yeah, I've played some second and third.
So as you've gotten more experience and older, have you found yourself drifting away from that roll and check balance system for the more narrative play, more narrative style?
Oh no. My it's purely genre based.
Is
For
it?
fantasy, I love that nitty gritty. I like Hackmaster. I like, especially for combat, like I like it to be low fantasy, dark, grim, lethal. And I think that's just because you like in a fantasy world, there's so much more things that are tied to like the real world.
Mhm.
So we just know a lot more about it in general.
I guess that makes sense.
Like the only like twist on the world is magic, essentially.
Mhm.
But in a sci-fi setting, there's just so many unknowns. How exactly does a faster than light engine work? Who knows? There's so many questionable decisions that you can't make a like, oh well, really at this strength you can only lift 27 pounds. Like, who knows? Like there's so
Right.
many, like you're dealing with alien concepts and things entirely beyond comprehension. And I think a narrative system can capture that easier because you don't have to get stuck in the weeds about how many forces of newtons you have to lift and jury rig something. Instead, you just have anti-gravity technology.
That's simple enough. Simple enough. I dig it. Is there anything else about the Star Wars flavor and the Genesis system that you wanted to mention before we kind of wrap things up?
No, just that I want to. Oh, I do like that they've broken it up into Age of Rebellion, Edge of the Empire, and then Forces of Destiny. So they've got, if you just want to play a Jedi game, you buy the Force and Destiny, and that one's everything you need to know about running a Jedi. And then they've got Edge of the Empire, which is entirely about being a scoundrel or a bounty hunter, and then Age of Rebellion for being a rebel and fighting the Empire. And each of them has, like, when you read it, you get the unique feel of that style of gameplay, and you can play with all three. They all work together and blend together.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So highly recommended, right?
Highly recommended.
Super. I recommend anybody who wants to check out something kind of new and interesting, check out Soulbound. And hopefully I'll remember when I type up the description for the podcast.
Yeah, I'll put in the names of the podcast into our chat.
I appreciate that because I forgot them already. All right. Guys, we want to be able to kind of detail one game each for the next few weeks until we run out of cool things that we're looking for in new games, etc. Not necessarily brand new, but just new to us, things that we want to get into. We hope you guys really dig it, like it. Send us feedback through Spotify, voice messages. You can send us messages online or through Facebook at Epic Table Games. Check us out online at epictablegames.com. We'll see you next time.
And share with your friends. Drink water.
Yes. All good advice.
Okay, new intro. We've changed the name, and we're still using the word paladin. Paladin. I mean, it hasn't been used in the English language in about 200 years, but okay.